Hello world, this is TN Politics with Maya, a weekly podcast where we explore modern leadership, policy, politics, and of course we meet inspiring people, such as my first guest today. If you like what you hear and what you see, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and support us in Patreon. That's the way to say that you like what you see. Episode 1 with a remarkable, inspiring person sitting next to me. Thank you so much for coming. So Catherine is the leader of EDF, one of the largest European networks based here in Brussels. A great human who supported me in quite a difficult time when I needed. And a great person to work with, as far as I remember, since last year. So it's nice to have you here. It's an honor to have you as my first guest. How do you feel?
I feel pretty good. Thank you. And thanks very much for inviting me.
Well, thanks for being here. Let's start from the start. How are you at the position where you're at? How did you end up being the General Secretary of EDF? We'll speak about EDF as well in a minute.
Okay, so the first thing is I'm the Executive Director of EDF, which is the Secretariat of the European Disability Forum. But actually the leaders of EDF, or the elected board members and executive and president, which are all elected by organizations of people with disabilities in Europe. And how I ended up here is, so originally, actually my first training was as a physiotherapist. And I worked in in Ireland and in the UK. And then I worked overseas in India and in Russia and the Northern Caucasus, and also then in Southeast Asia. And then I was working then for disability and development organizations. And then I came back to Belgium actually with my now husband. And we were going to stay for a couple of years in Belgium. And I started to work for a Brussels-based disability and development organization called CBM. And after some years, we were really fixed to stay in Belgium. And so I had been working on European overseas development policy. And I thought, we're staying in Europe. And actually, the EU does somehow a better job overseas than it does in many cases domestically for human rights issues. And so I thought I wanted to work on European issues. So I'd had an experience of working with the president of EDF, actually, Yanis Varoufakis. He was also the president of the International Disability Alliance at the time. So I had a very positive feeling about the European Disability Forum as a network in the field of disability, as a representative organization. And then the opportunity came up at the moment where I was thinking, I want to work on European issues. The opportunity in EDF came up, and I never looked back.
Interesting. I didn't know that you had background in physiotherapy. I read there is this very short bio actually in the EDF website saying what you've done so far, but it's very humble. 25 years of background in disability, inclusion, human rights, equality are just in one paragraph. So I didn't know about you being a physiotherapist. Is that helpful for your job now?
Not necessarily, no. No, it isn't actually.
But it's quite a big transition from
but that's over a long time though. Like now I'm 50 and I studied in my late teens, early 20s. So that's quite some time. And I think the experiences that I've had, so right from the beginning when I worked, maybe this is the important point. I saw that when I worked as a physiotherapist, that often the barriers people faced. So having physiotherapy was an important part, but getting back to an accessible house, dealing with their employers, dealing with the exclusion people with disabilities face in society was actually really often a worse dramatic impact on people's lives. And so when I was working overseas, also this was something that came up again, the importance of the environment around somebody.
I also had a similar, it was not a revelation, because the thing is that the more you spend in organization like that or in a reality like that, you just see it, especially if you yourself don't have a disability. I don't have a disability. And when I was working in a service provider back at home in Bulgaria, most of the time I would feel that it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how well we train everyone within the
Yeah.
team. The people, you cannot create this isolated reality where everything
No.
is great, even though if you have the best trained
Yeah.
staff, the most accessible building, and the I don't know, the receptionist with the most smiles per day. It doesn't matter.
It's only a limited part of somebody's life.
Yeah. Well, we started very, we dig in deep already with the first question about disability, but what is your experience with how disability as a topic has been seen through the years? Is it more, are policymakers more interested now in disability than they were, I don't know, 10 years ago? Or do you see it just as within the same level?
I think it depends who you're talking about. So you have a lot more, because you have the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, so governments have had to make serious, take much more serious how they're going to make national policies, both disability related and also how you include people with disabilities in general policies. So I think there is more attention given. Yeah, so yes, and you see like at the European level, there's a very robust strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities, which outlines different legislation that will be put in place and different policies. And we have definitely over the last years, I've seen more attention given by the press to disability related issues. But it's not all positive. So you also have, so it's definitely not always a positive attention. You've seen in some countries also the same way as populists might undermine the rights of certain marginalized groups. That can happen with people with disabilities as well. So the attention is not always in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking now, listening to you, that it's interesting how we speak about policymaking and disability, but if you enter a room, most of the rooms, the decision makers are actually not people with disabilities.
This is true. Yeah, that's true.
So that's also something we need to maybe reflect.
Yeah.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit of the actual topic of disability. I'm really interested for you to tell me a bit more about EDF, how you run the organization, because you've been there for a while. Also, as an EDF representative, you've been a vice president of the social platform. So you've seen really different angles of the EU bubble. How do you run EDF?
Well, the first thing, like what I mentioned before, so within EDF, we have really strong board and executive committee. Mm-hmm. And so as the director of the Secretariat in Brussels, I work really closely with the elected leaders. So we have, of the executive committee, we meet 5 times a year at least, but I'm in very regular contact with the president, with the vice presidents for everything related to finance, with the treasurer. So I have to say that this is something which is... it makes my job a lot easier because I'm directly in touch
Lucky
with.
You.
But it really does make a big difference. And then we have a board which is much wider, which is 30 elected board members plus the president in there as well. There's this huge range of expertise. So if I give an example on a piece of legislation that was published on September the 6th, a proposal on September 6th by the Commission for the European Disability Card. We have already also inside the Secretariat a lot of expertise, a lot of colleagues who've been working on these issues for many years. So we rely on our own internal analysis. We've already had discussions in the executive. We have members who've been part of pilot projects on this. Mm-hmm. So we have such a rich amount of expertise. This really helps. So this means that as the director of EDF, you've got a load of different sources of knowledge and expertise that you can draw on. Mm-hmm. So this makes things relatively, that's a big advantage.
It's interesting that if we have this example, I would say that that's also valid for, let's say, the feminist organization, or that's also valid for the environmental organization. Yeah. And then Brussels, I think that's the charm of actually the EU bubble. Of course, there's many disadvantages and it's a bit elitist sometimes. But then on the other hand, it's full of a lot of... There's a lot of richness. There is a lot of diversity when it comes to what is drawn from the different corners of Europe.
Yep.
And how do you balance what you have to defend when it comes to rights in front of other civil society representatives who also come? Because I think it's easier in a way. I mean, it's easier if you have to defend human rights in front of people who are opposing due to uninformed decisions or something like that. But if you have to defend it and prioritize it in front of other social rights agenda? How do you do that?
Well, the first thing is that in EDF, we are really collaborative and we're part of a lot of networks. We're members of a lot of networks and we work a lot in partnership. So there isn't, I don't think that I'm usually in a position of defending. So for example, when we talk about equality issues or equal treatment more generally, we try to do everything in harmony with the other equality networks. So to discuss together, to outline priorities, to hear from the other, because, so for example, if you think about the rights of older people or LGBTI community, there's people who are both people with disabilities and older people, or people with disabilities from the LGBTI community. And they're, we work best together, harmonise together. Of course, that always takes a bit longer. It's easier nearly to work by yourself in your own silo. But when we do those things together, because all we want is to expand rights for everyone. And that has a general positive knock-on effect on the whole community.
Yeah. I'm thinking now, when many years ago, when I was young, or let's say younger, not young, because I still identify in a way as a young person. But when I was younger, I was part of the National Youth Forum of Bulgaria and then in the European Youth Forum based here. And I remember that one of the things that really struck me eventually after really few years of working with them is that I will not be there. Like, that will not be my target audience forever, because I'm not young and I'm not getting any younger with the years. And eventually, if you are, I don't know, in your late 30s and you're still involved into youth activism, that to me is a bit suspicious. And I think that sometimes we enter in different points in life, different areas where we can advocate more authentically. And I think that with what we do here as well in the EU bubble is that we see from different corners more or less the same core of human rights as an approach. And
that's one way of looking at it. But another angle is that good youth policies are not only good for young people, they're good for everybody. So not just because you're a parent and you have children who will grow up and you want to see a society where young people have opportunities, but everyone in society benefits when young people have opportunities in education and training for work. It doesn't help anyone. This is something that I don't really understand about it, narrowing, social support or narrowing the amount of attention governments give to human rights and equality, because it's good for all of us. When, for example, there is full opportunities for young people. Everyone, I benefit, and I'm nowhere near as young as you are.
Well, the thing is that I think it's very difficult, though, to make human rights as the center of policy making, because people, we end up with different policymakers, and I don't want to generalize, because sometimes you do have elected people in power who are so well aware of what human rights are, why they're important, why it's not a perk or an extra to sprinkle around your messages, but it's actually a core principle of how you develop policies. But then there also are people who say, no, that's just not important at this point. We have to think about the energy crisis, and then it's pushed to the side. So how do we make human rights the center of policy making?
Oh, I don't really know. I know that we have our individual responsibilities to go out and vote. So we have the European elections next year. So this is like for all the people who want to see politicians in place who care about, all of the people in their communities and society, then our first responsibility is voting.
Yeah. Are you hopeful actually for the elections? Because it's less than a year. Yeah. It's coming soon.
Yeah, you're right. Not really, to be honest, but I don't think that anyone in the sort of equality field would feel super optimistic. You have a lot more prominence. You have a lot more elections won by parties that wouldn't put an emphasis on human rights and non-discrimination more generally. So I think that's quite worrying. And then when you look, that's one thing at the national level, and you already see it in some countries. You have already had these kind of election results, other countries that can come in the future. And then afterwards with the European elections, you have then more governments who would maybe, nominate commissioners who would be less committed to EU values around human rights and non-discrimination or social Europe, and be more committed to other elements of the the European program. So that I don't think many people would be feeling optimistic.
What would you say to somebody who says, well, if you have to choose between energy efficiency as a topic or Europe as independent as possible when it comes to energy and human rights, I would prioritize the first one. What would you say to somebody like that who claims that that's the more important topic?
So I haven't had this kind of conversation with somebody, which is a little bit maybe related to being in a bubble as well, and speaking more with...
No, I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm trying to
because I've heard it many times that people won't really say, no, I dislike the concept of human rights, or I don't care about children's rights, or people with disabilities shouldn't have that and that right. I haven't heard anyone in a while say that. But then on the contrary, they said that's just not important enough. There are more important things when it comes to society. And it's never human rights.
Yeah, I can see that. But I also think that governments can do more than one thing.
Yeah. So, that's a very clear answer. Okay, well, then we can go back a bit to the leadership and the management part of your work, because these are obviously two very different roles. And I think many people, when they see from the outside somebody who is a director, a secretary general, a CEO, whatever there is, sometimes leader and manager are mixed and people use them as synonyms, and they're so different. So how are you as a leader? Can you describe Katrin as a leader and then Katrin as a manager?
Well, so firstly, it's not something I've thought a lot about. So I'm thinking on the spot now. For me, management is about managing resources, the people and the finances and in general, the organization. And here I am, I think I'm very efficient. I can get a lot done in short periods of time. I like to put structures in place that, help people to work and to get things done, to present information in a very organized way, to plan with my team, because I have a really excellent team in EDF. So I have colleagues who are managing different departments, also doing that very well. So on the management side, what I try to improve then on my side is to kind of cope with, we have a lot of growth in EDF. We have more program. We have, for example, something you're very familiar with. We increased our work a lot last year because of the Russian war on Ukraine. And so we have like a new team working on all of that. So I have to do things to make sure that everything is fine with this amount of growth that we've had, that people still have the same amount of support, that new staff still understand the organization well. So as a manager, I think collaboration and efficiency. And I love, actually, one of the things I like most is watching people I've worked with doing great things. So this is another big benefit of my job. In terms of leadership, for me, one of the most important things is to be very transparent and accountable and to do what you say you'll do. So this is something which for me is, I think, naturally the thing that I'm most, that is most important to me, that I'm very disappointed in myself if I don't manage to do.
I think that's first of all, that's great. And I think that's one of the markers of when you have conscious leader, that they're accountable for what they do. And then they don't keep it a secret. I've always had this thing, if somebody is very secretive and there's always lack of clarity in communication and information, there's always, that's not a good sign to me. And I don't need to explore it. And I think that maybe the first or the second time that has happened to me, either as a team leader or as a participant within a team, I've learned to know that this is just a bad sign, and I don't need to find the explanation why. I know that that's not a good sign. And how do you? Can you give me an example of how do you keep yourself accountable? Because I think that sometimes we use really big words in describing leadership, but then the habits behind it and the actual efforts behind it are unclear.
Yeah. So I'm very open about what I do and where I'm going and what I'm saying. And when I know that we have a lot of important things in EDF that we work on. And so I make sure that I'm extremely well informed on the topics that I'm working on by the colleagues internally who are experts, by our members. So I report back very openly about what's happened, what next steps are. So I'm basically, I have quite an open book calendar as well. So this is something which, and I share all of the decisions which have been made in the management team. Everybody can see decisions which have been made. This is the culture also within the European Disability Forum. Decisions from the executive committee are shared. We publish, for example, on the website, the outcomes of our General Assembly, of our board. So it's throughout the whole organization trying to be very open about what we're doing, how we're using, public and, foundations or any of our donors' resources. When we have these meetings and gatherings, what comes out of them. So I try to have this both for me personally, how I'm working, and then we have this also within EDF.
I think there is no other way, honestly, because it's very difficult if you have an organization built like that with a leader who doesn't, it's not synchronized their effort with that, and vice versa. You cannot have somebody whose culture as an individual is like that, and then the organization is not like that. So most of the time, these things align, or there is, well, I also want to go around the question of leadership. I cannot ask you about being women in a leadership role, because I think that that's something, there's not, by the way, I've just something to mention. When I was researching about how do I want to shape this podcast, most of the podcasts about politics and most of the podcasts about leadership are not hosted by women, which, I mean, shocking. But still, I think that it's a lot of the leadership topic when it comes to women in leadership. It's not popular. I don't know if people maybe are not interested. We'll see about that. But how do you see women in leadership generally as a topic, and how do you see yourself as a woman in a leadership position? Has that helped you, or has that been in your way of being a good leader?
Okay, so that's a good question. Indeed, I think that a lot of women I know in leadership positions are super busy because they're juggling they're not giving 24/7 to their work. So they might not be able to get involved with podcasts or extra activities. They may have family responsibilities as well that draw them in different directions, not just children, but, women are in our society are doing more of that sort of unpaid family care work and so forth. So I think that's definitely a factor maybe which makes women less visible in certain, like I'm super, super careful about any kind of time that I spend in something which is not really directly task focused. So all this sort of networking and things like that, I'm extremely careful about, my time there. Whether it's, I don't consider it a disadvantage for me at all within the European Disability Forum. I've always felt very respected, even so, like in terms of being a mother, for example. I have 4 kids, so that's something which does take up. Yeah, exactly. But I've never felt that in any way disadvantage, and my time is always respected. And if somebody ever says, would you be able to come and do this? They are very absolute. I've never felt bad when I've said I won't be able to because of family responsibility. So I think in EDF it has not been, it is not, it hasn't posed a problem for me. And I think I make probably, I'm more efficient with my time because my time is, I have a lot of different people who are expecting time from me. So, but having said that, I also think that the drain on women in general in leadership is we judge ourselves more. We're more self-critical, maybe less, maybe less likely to step forward and, put yourself forward as much to do things. I'm definitely not an expert on this topic, but I think that that's probably less self-evident for women to step up.
I think that there's a lot of studies as well on that topic about how you negotiate a promotion, for example.
Yes,
and there is data on that, and I think that it's really interesting how still society somehow really politely ignores that topic and goes around. And on the other hand, I think that there's visibly more women in different leadership positions, but then that also doesn't always correlate with more gender sensitive organization at the end of that. Because I've argued that actually one of the most sexist bosses I have was a woman. So sometimes it's not a guaranteed success. No. But then on the other hand, it's very strange that in many human rights, especially based organization, you would end up with a very male-dominated room with the board, the director, and so I think that that's also an interesting subject. And there's still some kind of a stigma around it, even though in Brussels, I thought that conversation would be far easier back at home, for example, in Bulgaria, there is this very interesting, I don't know if it's the background of the feministic movement in Bulgaria. It's so strange because in all of those, Bulgaria was never an officially communistic country, but it was part of the Soviet Union, like undercover in a way. And there are Bulgarian politicians who were exploring the opportunity after between the 50s and the 90s for us to join as part of the Soviet Union, which, I mean, but then in a communist reality, a woman is not expected only to work. So the feminist culture, I know that in some culture there is the question of, are women supposed to be in the kitchen? Are they supposed to be in the office? Where they're in Bulgaria, you are supposed to do everything. So you are supposed to be in the factory doing whatever the men are doing, but then also be pregnant quite often, and then have children, and then juggle it with together with the factory work. So that heritage is interesting, because when I speak to people, and especially to people from the feminist movement in different countries, I know that, for example, the women in the workplace question is still valid question, but for some part of Europe, women in the workplace is okay, but women in leadership position is something, or in policy making position is where we fail.
Yeah, this is why it's a miracle. Well, sometimes I think it's a miracle that any decisions get made in the EU, because the countries are so diverse. In terms of background and what are the struggles, particularly feminist struggles in different countries. What are the, where are women represented in the workplace and leadership? There's a huge amount of diversity.
Yeah, it is. And you can always see that there is when it comes to women in the workplace, if we have to go back, women in leadership, women in policy making, there is really a different attitude towards women in some of those countries and in some of those sectors as well. Yeah. And I think that especially women who are trying to have a career together with the family, you get questioned things that you would not really question a man.
Yes, for sure.
Like if there is a father of 4 kids running for office or being in charge of a network, that's like, well, he's a father of 6 and you should be proud of that. If you're a mother of however many
men are
children.
Trusted more. They're trusted more if they have children. And it's a very strange, in EDF, I never had these kind of questions. And I have had in the past, and I have had in other environments. In EDF, I haven't had, who's looking after your children while you're away or things like this.
I've been asked that.
Yeah, but I haven't in the last years, really. So
the thing is that I've been asked that also from the place of care, which sometimes I think that there is you can ask that in a very unpolite way.
It's true,
why are you here and who's taking care of your kids? But I've also had, especially other women, like,
do you have enough help?
My God. But then I would always be very stressed of this question, because my overthinking would hear it as, well, you're an irresponsible mom. Yes.
But that's your own judgment as well, isn't it? It's because we expect to perform super well also as present mothers. So
I have a story which in the episode 0, where I speak about why the tea led me to politics, because it's the most random metaphor, but it's actual story, and it's the story of my great grandmother who passed away when she was 97. So I had her for a huge portion of my life, and she was such an inspiring woman to have as a great grandmother. But God, she was some of the things that we would talk about, I would laugh and then I would be so upset at the same time. But every time I had to do a conference abroad or something like that, she would ask me, who is taking care after your children? And I would say, they're not my children, they're our children together with my husband. We are responsible for the children together as we have produced them together. And she would always be like, oh, your poor husband. And I'm like, no, I'm not going on a conference. Is not a party. I'm doing a speech. I'm working.
I'm at work.
And I remember we had this conversation, and I said, my husband used to do a lot of night shifts at the hospital. And I called her and said, do you know who is taking care after his children every night he's at the hospital? It's me. And she was like, yeah, but that's not the same. I was like, no, it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's his children and my children.
But in our society, it's not the same.
And she was nearly 100 years old. I give her that. But it's still people sometimes see that for women. Okay. Has it ever been helpful to be a woman in a leadership position then? Because we went through all of the disadvantages, even though we didn't call them that. Has it ever been extra helpful?
I don't know, actually.
Well, there's not really a way to measure that. You can't really ask a person within the partnership.
No, I really don't know. I don't know. Maybe perhaps in ways that I'm not aware of.
Mm-hmm. Last year, that's the last thing I'll go when it comes to women in leadership. Last year, I was part of all women retreat, leadership retreat. Yeah. And we had a very interesting activity where I miserably failed. And it was about describe yourself without describing your job, your profession, what you do.
Oh, yeah.
Can you do that?
Yes, I think I can. I'm an Irish person. I'm going to be 50 in a few weeks. I live in Belgium with my husband and 4 kids. I enjoy being out in nature. I love sport. Watching it, doing it. And I kind of like living in Brussels because everyone is a foreigner. It's a nice mix of people. That's...
But you did so much better than me.
Yeah.
I hope when I'm 50, I can do that as well.
Yeah,
okay.
Look forward to it. There's plenty of good things about being 50.
Good. Okay. Well, zooming out of the women in power topic, going back to the leadership position only, can you give me, what's the worst lesson you've learned as a leader?
Oh.
You have different situations within the network. And I think that the example that you started with the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, we had a lot of conversations back then, and I know that it was difficult from a professional point and from a human point to be involved in the work that needed to be done there.
Yeah, and there I see, actually, I have, some very, of course, we were all shocked and not shocked by the war in Ukraine, and we knew as well, working in the sectors that we working with people with disabilities, that like in every war situation, they will be facing real extreme life-threatening difficulties, both getting away from war zones but from my point of view, because there are very good organizations of people with disabilities in Ukraine, we've been able to work a lot with them. That hasn't been, that is really tough on the people working there and managing to keep their lives going and their organizations going. I think probably the period of time of COVID-19 was also pretty heavy going, because we had that as well. The same thing where something came overnight that really shocked us, but then the whole of society broke down. So, everyone had their own personal issues, being cut off from family, being isolated at home.
Being scared.
Being scared. Realizing what your teacher does all day when you have to try and homeschool your children. So that was also quite a big, even though we've forgotten about it a little bit, that was quite a dramatic period of time as well. That changed us permanently, just like the war in Ukraine will change society permanently.
Mm-hmm. I remember I relocated in 2021, so I got Brussels under COVID, which was so difficult to start any social life. I mean, of course you have to imagine that people in their late 30s are not that much into social life in my case, but still it was so difficult. And then professionally, to see all of the different people, most of the people who work in the EU bubble are not Belgium, so they're not from here. Everyone is from somewhere, and to see that all of those people are detached from their families, detached from, most of the time, elderly parents, detached from. So it was very difficult. And I think that became a bit of a problem from a leadership perspective and from a management perspective, because all of those fears are transferred into everyday doubts, operational problems due to lack of efficiency of people, of environment, of everything. how do you function from a crisis to a crisis? Because that example that we just went from the COVID to the war, it was difficult on civil society. It is difficult on civil society nowadays.
Yeah, it's true. I think the key to it, so for example, there's always something to learn. And, we all got better at hybrid working and all those kind of things through COVID, with all the negative impact that it had on, individuals. And probably even to this day, many people's lives are permanently transformed. All the people with, long-term effects from COVID-19, for example. But coping from one to another is just every time you have to improve how you're working. Mm-hmm. So you find new ways. So, for example, the key for me, what I remembered with COVID-19 is there was a lot of people with disabilities were really badly impacted. And we did all of that work that we did around that time with the same human resources. So what I knew when we started to engage with the organizations in Ukraine, that we needed to bring in extra resources to have more staff and to be able to really provide more direct support to the organizations, which in COVID-19 we did it with existing people. And that drained a lot from our existing work and also from people. But it was the dominant theme. It was the most important thing in people's lives. Whereas with the war in Ukraine, we were lucky enough to benefit from funding from actually an international organization called CBM International. And they provided us with very flexible support at the beginning, so we were able to fund our members in their work around Ukraine. So for me, like, one of the learning things would be when there is another crisis and we need to work on it, we need to resource it straight away as well, so that we can make sure that we have these conversations actually around that time, that you need to have some people to do the work in addition, because your existing staff, to put double job on them is also, somebody is going to pay the price.
Yeah. I think that's also regarding, it goes a bit towards the question of philanthropy and donors and how civil society is supported and the flexibility that it's needed.
Yeah. I had one donor who called us up and said, is everything okay? Are all your staff okay? Do you need any extra funding for anything? And then we had other donors who said, any change in your program needs to be absolutely justified and you need written explanations. So the donors approached it very differently.
Yeah, I've had also a similar experience with very flexible, but I think that the key to that is donors who manage money and understand the impact that they want is one thing, but then donors who manage money and manage projects, that's different. Because sometimes you can have, I've had one conversation, I wouldn't name them like that because I think that it's not fair to ask them now, but I've had one, the best donor I've ever worked with was an organization where they called and they said, we had a study visit with you. We like really what you do. We're very impressed with your work, blah, blah, blah. This is the amount of money we can give to you. We want you to make a list of the things that you want to achieve within the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years. And we'll discuss with you what is achievable on our end and what we can fund and what we cannot fund.
Wow.
And that happened to me once, but it was still...
Yeah, but it's really, it makes a huge difference, the attitude of the donor.
Yeah, and I think that in a way, I think that's a huge thing. And we didn't really plan to talk about philanthropy, but I think that there is a problem in philanthropy because there is such a huge power play there. And you're most of the times not on equal basis with the donor. You have to really play around to impress. You have to really agree to whatever their demands change to, and sometimes that's very unfair.
Yeah, well, there's different types of funding and there's different motivation behind that funding and management behind that funding. And the best case scenario, of course, when we're going through a crisis situation is that donors are flexible and can also appreciate that you're also a group of human beings trying to do a job in a difficult context. But I have to say that was... So my learning is the next crisis, we try at the same time as identifying what we need to do, what means we will have to do it.
Yeah. And that's a tough lesson because sometimes you have to agree that you cannot fix it all.
Yeah.
You cannot do it all.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that before going to anything else, I want to maybe just touch upon a bit when it comes to the EU bubble, because we already... several times said, well, the EU bubble, this, the EU bubble, then. What's the EU bubble? Let's start from that.
Well, I think that it's the whole population and the policy circle based in Brussels, which is focused on the European institutions. And so you have a whole population of people who live in Belgium, in Brussels, and they're focused on EU policy making. They're inside these policy circles. I'm not fully integrated in that. My husband is Belgian, actually, and most of my sort of outside of work activities are.
So half EU bubble.
I'm half EU bubble. I'm EU bubble at work, and at home I'm.
It's like
it's
Clark
true.
Kent and
Yeah. And so you have. I remember years ago somebody saying to me, but you never meet any Belgians in Brussels because they're like always gone. They go home in the evening and they're gone on the weekend. You don't meet them. And I just meet them all the time. So because of my home life. So I didn't, I hardly even knew at that time that existed, the sort of, and there's expat community. It's not just one community. Mm-hmm. There's communities of very many different nationalities, which if you like difference and diversity, Brussels is great.
Brussels is the place. Yeah. I have actually similar experiences you do, because my circles are also, I don't know that many Belgian people, but then my husband, who works in a Belgian hospital, Dutch speaking, all of his, he had to learn Dutch very fast when we arrived. All of his friends and colleagues and acquaintances, they're all from here.
Yeah.
And every time when he tells me a story about his experience, is very different from how I'm experiencing Brussels.
Yeah, it's two different worlds.
Yeah, it's very interesting and it's very enriching. And I can also see, for example, in the school of my children, there's so I don't even know how many nationalities are in their class. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Yeah. There's so many languages and there's so many cultures, and all the time somebody's bringing whatever weird food our family included. So It's an interesting way to see Brussels. Diverse, yeah. Okay, speaking about diversity and about human rights, there is a small ad read that I also want to do, and it's first of all a question. Do you know the word? And I'll say it in my Bulgarian way of saying it. Barabar. Do you know what that means?
No.
Barabar. So that's a very beautiful word, which you can find in a lot of the Balkan languages. So there is also in Albanian, in Turkish, in Bulgarian, and it means together.
Okay.
Zajedno. So Barabar is our first brand as a guest here. It's a very nice card game, very interesting board game with cards, which has 5 different teams that you can choose. Ecologists, have a look. And what you can do is that you can also join forces with 75 different heroes in order to save the world from the upcoming apocalypse, which unfortunately, it's with all of the realistic characters that they're there, it really, yes, it sometimes feels too real. So that's an alternative, of course, to boring and incomprehensive lessons. Barabar entertains while educating and modernizing classic teaching. So whatever you're playing the game with your family and with your friends, or just using Barabar as an educational tool or as a team building activity, you can enjoy quality time together and have fun, also while discussing difficult topics concerning the values and attitudes of the democratic society we are trying to build or we live in. That's still open for discussion. So Barabar is open for you to get it at www.barabar.eu. So please support. It's a small brand, and I'm very happy to be able to support them while shouting out the brand here. And I can tell that it's part of the game park we have at home, and I strongly recommend it. And if you want to be part of the next episode as a brand, please write to t.politics.maya@gmail.com, and we can try to think of something, especially if you're a brand that tries to save the world, as Barabar is. So, word of the day,
it's nice.
Catherine, it's Barabar.
Yeah, it looks nice.
Yeah, it is. And there's many different characters. And of course, there's like Martin Luther King and Einstein, but there's also like Emma Watson, for example. So it's an interesting mix. Well, going back from the human rights and the leadership, is there something you're very proud of an achievement that you've had within EDF, within your time there?
Yeah, we had actually, the first thing that comes into my head is we had a fabulous moment this year in May. We had like a huge gathering at the European Parliament. It was the European Parliament of Persons with Disabilities. And I remember at one point, so the whole day was just, for me, it was just great. Like my team were amazing. The members were amazing. At the end of the day, when there was a team photo, and I just thought, oh my God, you're just so fabulous, all of you. And our members got delegations coming from every country. We had, fabulous speeches from every country. We got a great sense of what was important to people. They had a chance to, to say their truth, to say what was important to them in front of the different leaders of the institutions we had there. We had the president of the parliament, we had various commissioners, vice presidents. It was really and it also energized. That's May. So we had this huge, the hemicycle completely full.
Yeah.
And this was fabulous.
I saw pictures of that.
Yeah, it was really great. And then that also gives us this energy, where we have the priorities, what people want us to campaign for and to work towards coming up to the next EU elections.
So as first episode, of course, there has to be a camera dying. So thank you for bearing with us. And going back to the conversation, what do you envision for the future of EDF? What do you want to achieve as a leader of EDF? And I know that, again, you say it's a team effort and then all of the board and the ExCom, but you as the visionary and in the same time operational person in Brussels, what do you envision?
So in the next year, we will work on new strategy for the organization because of all those things you mentioned earlier, the different crises that have hit Europe, and we know there will be more in the future. We're working across many fields, so it's a time to take stock and discuss with our members what are the priorities, what are the most important things to be doing. So we will have this big work in front of us coming up to the next EU elections. When the new sort of parliament is in place and the new commission, we will adopt our own organizational strategy for 5 years. So the ideal thing would be that by then we've had this big conversation with members about what are those things that the EU can do for persons with disabilities in Europe, and what can we do to support the movement in general, and to sort of to come back to that, and because we have been led in different directions by the different crises going on. So this will be an important milestone for me in the next year, more than a year. We also have a really significant piece of EU legislation that I would really hope can be adopted very fast. It was published by the Commission in September, this EU disability card and parking card. It might seem it's a bit technical piece of legislation, but it's a
massive.
big thing. It's a big thing. You see, it's a big thing. So this I also would like to see in people's hands.
Okay, well, that's you have a lot of work ahead of you. Well, what then is Catherine hopeful for, apart from you as a director? Yeah,
so I personally am working on being getting more focused and maintaining my, developing my calm and my patience, and not doing too many things at the same time, and doing a smaller amount of things better, maybe, because that whole thing of the different crises also leads you to have your finger in many pies. So that's my New Year's resolution taken in September.
Well, I think that the crisis really provokes self-reflection. I think that after the COVID, a lot of people really reflected on how they are with their lives and where they want to be. And now after the war in Ukraine, I think also that's another moment of people assessing what's important. So, okay. Well, I hope that you find that, and I hope that you manage to balance it out. It seems like you are from an external point of view.
I feel like,
Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy that I see you again. And I'm happy that we've established this partnership even outside of work now. So thank you for your time. And thank you for being with us. I know that maybe I look too stressed. That's only because I'm very stressed. maybe shows, but I hope that with each episode, I would be feeling more myself and more confident, and my camera will stop dying, because that's also technically quite important. If you like what you see and you want to see more, do subscribe to the YouTube channel, support us on Patreon, and see you next week. Be kind, hug your dog, enjoy life. I don't know. See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Maya.